Chicago.
When looters broke into stores early Monday morning, it looked as though Chicago police were outnumbered and outmaneuvered.
Just before 9 p.m. near the corner of Clark and Washington, a 34-year-old CTA bus driver was attacked and stabbed by a man.
We have to take less in order for a casino to be viable.
Chicago.
What's up, guys? It's Jason here, and welcome back to my YouTube channel, Windy City Insight. As some of you have enjoyed my other videos, the rise and fall of New York City and the rise and fall of Philadelphia, I thought we'd delve into a new city. Today we go to Chicago. When's the last time you've been there? The name brings to mind taking selfies in front of the Bean, properly known as Chicago Gate, falling into a food coma with a deep dish Chicago pizza native to the Midwestern city, but famous throughout the US, yummy! Or simply window shopping along the Magnificent Mile, Chicago's equivalent of Fifth Avenue. As of 2018, Chicago is also the second most visited city in the country with 54.1 million visitors, ahead of Atlanta, Georgia at 51 million visitors, and Orange County, California at 48 million visitors. That's an impressive achievement, but for anyone who digs a little bit deeper, Chicago's undeniable appeal to visitors isn't enough to hide its decline as a safe and economically sound American city. Chicago still might be the cultural capital of the Midwest, but it's undeniable that the city has changed for the worse, and possibly forever, especially due to the impact of COVID-19. Economic stagnation, fewer jobs, rising crime, Chicago seems to have it all in all the wrong places. So, before we dive in, if you wouldn't mind just tapping that like button for the YouTube algorithm, I'd really appreciate it. If you've ever been to Chicago or had a deep dish Chicago pizza, be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell for new videos each week. Thanks for doing that, and now let's continue on with what happened to Chicago, Illinois, and the future of this once great American city. Chicago's claim to fame. Chicago became a major American city because of its lucky location, almost smack dab in the middle of the US. That means it was in the perfect position to become the center of industrial trading, the transportation of agricultural products to both coasts, and a meeting place for ambitious Midwesterners to fulfill their American dream. All in all, Chicago really became the city of gleaming skyscrapers after World War II. Similar to other already industrialized American cities, the plethora of jobs that World War II created because of the war's need for goods ranging from parachutes to torpedoes to aircraft, Chicago saw an influx of veterans in their capital post-World War II. Cash-rich veterans who wanted to live in a bustling city with Midwestern values chose Chicago as their new home. This influx of people and money reshaped Chicago's proper city borders. The once dangerous inner city of Chicago, known for its diverse selection of mostly ethnic-based gangs, became prime real estate as more people left the suburbs and moved closer to where office and general white-collar jobs were. With middle and upper-middle-class suburbanites, rather than gangsters and the working poor, now filling the city, the government began to take the initiative to beautify the city with green spaces, commission art and public spaces, and clean up the streets. The city mostly prospered. In fact, by 2020, the gross metropolitan product, GMP, of Chicago was an estimated $629 billion, coming in third to only New York and Los Angeles. Publicly listed companies ranging from insurance giant State Farm to food and beverage goods behemoth Mondelez International all call Chicago home. So what's with Chicago's turn for the worse? Why and how? COVID-19's financial impact on Chicago. Chicago's decline is in the context of Illinois State's overall decline. Since the mid-2000s, Chicago has faced its 7th consecutive year of population decline. In almost a decade, it's lost nearly 250,000 of its residents. To put that into context, it's 3 times more than any other state except New York. What do the two places have in common? Sky-high real estate prices and taxes that squeeze the working middle class. As a case in point, as if to discourage homeownership, Chicago had 2 times the property taxes of the national average. More specifically, as of 2021, Illinois continued to have average property taxes of around $4,419, even though its median home value is $194,500, lower than the national median home value of $217,500. Why the discrepancy between having lower home values on average but having higher property taxes? Illinois homeowners can thank the ineptitude of Chicago's government since in 2021, Chicago had an almost $94 million property tax increase, and almost half of that went to making up pension funding shortfalls. It's just one way the state of Illinois robs its own citizens' pockets to alleviate socioeconomic issues in its most important city. Other examples contributing to brain drain in Chicago, especially during COVID-19, are some of the highest sales tax rates in the country, at anywhere from 9 to 10%, with Illinois having the rare distinction of being one of the only 7 states to charge tax on gas. It also has the highest cell phone tax in the USA. While public transportation is an option, albeit not the safest one in Chicago, driving will also financially set back residents since Illinois has one of the highest frequencies of toll fees nationwide. In most other states, roadway tolls typically contribute to the maintenance and improvement of actual roads. In Illinois, it goes mostly to ensuring the government of Chicago can still function financially. It's a legitimate concern considering that COVID-19 exposed and worsened the poor state of the city's finances.
COVID-19's estimated impact on revenue loss for 2020 totals no less than $783 million, or 65% of our total estimated gap.
In fact, about a year ago, Chicago's mayor, Lori Lightfoot, disclosed that the city faced a $1.2 billion budget gap for the fiscal year 2021.
Our projected gap for 2021 is estimated to be $1.2 billion.
It's the single largest budget gap in Chicago's history, and the government attributed it to rising unemployment, poverty, and disruption of small and larger businesses due to the pandemic-related lockdowns. At the same time that businesses closed for the health of the public for months at a time, consumer spending also declined by about 10%. It meant less taxes for Chicago's government, and by the mid-year of 2020, the city already had a $798 million budget shortfall. Chicago's chief financial officer seemed to subtly acknowledge that squeezing Chicago and Illinois residents further couldn't bridge that financial gap, telling the public that it's critical for the federal government to provide additional stimulus. In an interesting turn of events, Mayor Lightfoot also mentioned another possible solution to the systematic financial deficits: allowing a casino in the city.
The potential revenue that could be generated, not just for Chicago, but for the entire state from a Chicago casino.
The inflow of revenue from a casino would be a lifeline for the police and fire department's pension funds. In case you were wondering exactly why not even a single casino hasn't made Chicago its home, even though casinos have been legalized in the state of Illinois for about 30 years, it's mostly a case of the government imposing high fees for casinos to get started, and the fear that vice crimes would increase. Just how expensive would it be to start and run a casino in Chicago? $250,000 for the application fee, a $15 million reconciliation fee, and $120 million in gambling fees, as well as a 33.3% privilege tax that doesn't exist for casinos in other states. It's another instance of Chicago's government seeming to discourage business in the city. Rioting, violence, and civil unrest during COVID-19. Is Chicago safe? The financial uncertainty that Chicago's government has faced is on par with the actual residents of Chicago and has fueled civil unrest, rioting, and widespread looting during COVID-19. Unemployment in the city, including people who are speculated to have completely given up looking for work, was about 15.3%, about 7% higher than the national average of about 8.5%. At the height of the pandemic and lockdown, Chicago's unemployment rate reached a shocking 17%. To put these numbers into perspective, Chicago's unemployment was about 3.1% from September to February of last year. The majority of unemployed Chicagoans made less than $40,000 a year. In contrast, only about 9% of individuals making more than $75,000 a year were unemployed. Women and African Americans were almost 2 times as likely as white males to be unemployed during COVID-19 and remain unemployed immediately after the pandemic. COVID-19 threw the city's most vulnerable workers into a tempest, and while recovery is underway, the rioting and violence that plagued the city has shed light on the extent of lawlessness in Chicago. After George Floyd's death, protests turned into riots and looting throughout the country, including in Chicago. For the first time in 52 years, Chicago's mayor asked the state's governor to send the National Guard to support the overwhelmed police. 375 National Guard officers eventually tried to help Chicago. As soon as the nice, peaceful protests turned into violent rioting, the city also imposed a curfew of 9 p.m. and restricted access to downtown Chicago. Just some of the highlights of the rioting and looting include looters using a U-Haul on Chicago's crime-ridden South Side to steal weaves and other hair supplies from beauty salons, as well as stealing from a nearby Foot Locker, as well as looters smashing their way into a Fresh Kick store to steal sneakers with hammers. More than 20 Chicago police officers were harmed in the mass pillaging. Is it shocking then that 85% of Chicagoans polled last year considered gun violence to be the top social concern in the city? Overall, for all of 2021, every category of violent crime increased in Chicago. While from 2016 to 2019, Chicago's homicides dropped remarkably from 769 to 495, in 2020 alone, 7,069 people were murdered. That's a little bit over 50% of an increase from 2019. That statistic had Chicago leading homicides throughout the country, with New York hot on its trail with a 51% increase and Los Angeles third at a 37% increase. As can be expected, background checks for gun sales in the state of Illinois went from 4.9 million in 2019 to 7.4 million in 2020. Carjackings saw a marked increase by juveniles. There were 93 expressway shootings in comparison to 39 at the same time last year. Petty crimes, mostly committed by juveniles, include, again mostly juveniles, robbing and assaulting pedestrians and tipping over planters outside small businesses. The results? Chicagoans fearing for their lives and livelihoods. In a city where locals and almost non-existent tourists alike may be risking their safety going out at night, regardless of the neighborhood, it makes sense that the number of college-educated Chicagoans who left the city permanently during COVID-19 jumped by a third. Hand in hand, of the people leaving Chicago last year, about 26% were more than the year before were high-income earners, while only 1.6% of low-income earners managed to leave the city for greener pastures. Post-COVID and the future of Chicago. Is Chicago's economy growing? The various factors contributing to Chicago's downfall have a snowballing impact on its future, with its job growth over the next 10 years projected at 25.7% compared to the national average of 33.5%. Only one of its neighborhoods, the West Loop, of more than 10-plus neighborhoods with a range of commercial and office spaces, is actually in demand. Despite the presence of many multinational corporations in the city, the state of Illinois is actually 46th in terms of private sector job growth. Illinois and Chicago rely mostly on government jobs to keep the economy afloat. The government is the single largest reason for job growth in the state and city, and incredibly, around 40% of the government workers make more than $100,000 a year. It's one of the many reasons the state and city impose such high taxes on its residents. It's literally moving money from one pocket to another, paying many residents who work for the government with their own taxes and private employees paying as well. With an unremarkable competitive economy, Mayor Lightfoot has made it clear that money to ensure the city can continue to deliver vital resources needs to come from somewhere. To her credit, unlike her predecessors, she has refused to further increase property taxes, cut pensions, or borrow more money. Instead, she's aiming to help Chicago earn more revenue with legalized cannabis sales and further parking fees. Her government also seeks to downsize the city's workforce in order to have a more efficient city budget. It's a highly unpopular move in a city where government work is one of the main lines of work, but also very difficult to do with more than 90% of the government unionized. With no clear path forward to financial solvency, Mayor Lightfoot has limited options to keep the city a desirable place to live for ambitious people. That difficulty is reflected in a quarterly Crain's poll this year showing that 73% of Chicagoans thought the city was on the wrong track, and a mere 16% rated Mayor Lightfoot in a positive light. It's not an overwhelming vote of confidence, but as the country as a whole begins to emerge from COVID, maybe Chicago will come out all the better for its hardships. After all, as Floyd Mayweather often says, tough times don't last, tough people do. So with that said, thank you so much for watching my video. What do you think of Chicago? There was a significant amount of research, production, and traveling that went into making this video possible. If you haven't seen already, check out my video on the rise and fall of New York and the rise and fall of Philadelphia. Let me know if there are any other cities you'd like me to explore. As always, stay happy and healthy, and stay tuned for another episode of Company Insight next week.